Hey everybody, Caleb here with a new series, Movies for Film Newbies. The movie to start us off? The point of this series is to highlight movies that are considered classics that people may or may not have seen, and to explain why people should watch them in terms of their achievements for movie making. Now obviously with this choice, I know a lot of people have seen this movie. It's one of the most recognized movies and franchises in cinema history. Star Wars is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's expanded to much more than George Lucas could have ever imagined back when he created this original film in 1977. This film and this franchise have impacted my life perhaps more than any series. So this review and future reviews about Star Wars films are something that I take to heart, and they mean a lot to me. This is a good place to note that when talking about this film, I'm gonna try and refrain from referring to material outside the scope of this single movie. Lucas had no idea what this series would become, and while he may have had a rough story in place for sequels, it has expanded much further than any of that. The other movies, the TV shows, the books, the comics, they all have added so much to the lore and the atmosphere of Star Wars. But that material does not make this movie good. This movie is great on its own, and the extra material only makes this original movie better. That's what I hope to expound upon in this video. This is a story where the plot is pretty surface level, and it's one of the oldest stories in the book. It's the hero's journey. A young man comes from a poor existence, gets taken up by some old mentor, upon a magnificent journey, learns the training needed to transform from a peasant into a soldier. By the end, he becomes the hero that everyone needed. It's always a very successful formula because it's a story that is incredibly comforting to people, because there's no need for explanations. We understand who Luke is from the beginning, how he changes from the farmer boy to the hero who fights the Empire. We can grasp that entire concept without much being explained to us. The real magic of this movie is in the unique setting the story takes place in, and the use of Eastern philosophy to keep a Western audience interested. The setting of Star Wars is arguably the best part of this movie, because it takes places, figures, languages, and ideas that are so incredibly foreign and just plunges you into its depths, letting you figure out what everything means. You can understand when something is a foreign language without any subtitles, and you can loosely tell what everything is based on context clues. This movie does a great job of showing the scenery instead of explaining it, which is usually the basis of a good movie. A good movie shows you the story. It doesn't use exposition to just tell you what things happen. The costumes do a great job of showing the audience who is on what side, with the Empire appearing as darker enemies, Vader representing a dark samurai with his armor, and the stormtroopers in their clean white armor show that they are superior, at least in their minds, to the rest of the people around them. All this shows them to be the bad side, with references to World War II, names, and images. The good guys have a cleaner image in terms of reputation, and usually a more simplistic one. It invokes the idea that they are rebels, the scrappy underdogs who are struggling to maintain their identity apart from the all-consuming Empire. These are the two largest entities within this movie, but it is all of the little details in the background scenery and characters that make this world come to life. The best place that captures all of this is in the Mos Eisley Cantina. This scene is so eclectic in terms of its characters as well as its scenery. There are so many different things going on in this scene, and all just flows within the scene smoothly. Nothing seems out of place. Foreign, yes, because it's not like anything we've ever seen before, but it all makes sense in terms of this crazy world into which we've been dropped. This is also the feel from the now iconic Millennium Falcon. The interior of the ship feels worn. It feels like someone's lived there, which is exactly how it should feel, because Han Solo and Chewie essentially do live in this ship. You don't necessarily know how a spaceship is supposed to look, but you can tell when something looks worn and used. The fact that it isn't spotless and clean, along with most things in this cinematic world besides the stuff associated with the Empire, like the Death Star and the Imperial troops, it adds to the feeling that this world is real, that the camera is capturing a living, breathing world and not something that just came from someone's imagination. I briefly want to mention the special effects here because this movie brought a whole new meaning to the term. A lot of what this movie did were practical effects in terms of costumes and puppets, etc. And because of that, it holds up to the test of time better than some movies. However, the original special effects from that time definitely became dated over the years. It's hard to find a movie with those, however, because George Lucas did a remaster remaster of the films in the 1990s. And when his remasters came out, all the original films were no longer allowed to be sold, just the remasters. That goes into the territory of the notorious Han shot first controversy, which, if you're not familiar with it, is something worth looking up. It's an interesting part of Star Wars lore. That's a discussion for another video. The other thing that I really think makes this movie is its use of Eastern philosophy. While a lot of this is common knowledge at this point, I just briefly wanted to touch on what Lucas used from Eastern philosophy to create the Jedi and the Force. The idea of the Force primarily comes from Taoism, a Chinese philosophy originating in the 4th century BC. Tao literally translates to the way, and its ideas of simplistic living and removing oneself from desires, or how it plays out in Star Wars, emotions, plays a large role in who the Jedi are. Taoism also created the famous symbol of the yin-yang, which symbolizes, in a basic sense, good and evil, though in the actual Taoist tradition it means opposing forces, not necessarily just good and evil. There are also dots of the opposite color on either side of the colors, so on the black side there's a dot of white, and on the white side there's a dot of black. And this is supposed to show how there are always elements of the opposing side within a force. So for example, if we go to the ideas of good and evil, there's always some evil within a good force, and vice versa. The yin-yang also shows that these forces ultimately provide a balance between one another. All of these are heavily prevalent in Star Wars, and the idea of the Force and the Jedi resound with the ideas of Taoism. These ideas were not new to Western people, specifically referring to Americans here, in the late 70s when this movie came out, but they were by no means a mainstream philosophy that a lot of people knew of. This film brought these ideas to the biggest stage, and it grabbed people because of how foreign it was, but also how relatable it was. People related to the sense of good and evil and how the Force operated. People could also relate to not letting your emotions control you and instead someone controlling their emotions. This film is not the sole reason why Taoism and other Eastern philosophies became so popular in the West, again specifically referring to America, but it certainly contributed to how mainstream it became. This film's ability to take a relatively unknown concept and make it so appealing shows how well done it was in presenting these concepts. And that's where I'm gonna leave this film. There's plenty more that I could say about this film. Again, it's one of my favorite films of all time, but I want to leave the focus on why this film is just a good film, and not why Star Wars is a good franchise or how awesome its special effects are. It was a groundbreaking film when it came out, and it continues to hold up as one of the best films of all time. If by some chance you watch this video but you haven't seen the film, absolutely give it a chance. It does tend to get overhyped simply because people make it out to be such an outstanding film, something that they hold in such a high regard that it simply can't live up to that hype. It's just not possible. But it is so absolutely worth watching, and I hope this video makes you think it's a good enough film to watch. If you like the video, give it a like or leave a comment about what you think of Star Wars, or if you have ideas of what movie I should cover next. I would also love to hear about any other context you think I should do. I'm hoping to continue this series, Movies for Film Newbies, just to keep showing probably more older movies and just why people should watch them. If you like the content, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any other videos. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for next time.